sleep might have been manageable, maybe even improving, and then suddenly night waking increases, more frequent, more unpredictable, harder to settle back down, and it can feel like everything has unraveled, especially overnight. I'm Lyndsey, co-founder of the Holistic Sleep Coaching Program, where we train professionals to understand infant sleep through development, biology and behaviour, not rigid rules, scripts or quick fixes. One of the most difficult moments for parents is when night waking suddenly increases because it's exhausting, and often it doesn't feel like there's a clear reason why, but in most cases there is. The first thing to understand is this: night waking isn't random, and it isn't usually a problem to fix. It's communication. It reflects what's happening physically, developmentally, emotionally. Sleep at night isn't separate from the day, it's a continuation of it. So when night waking increases, it's usually pointing to something underneath. And this might be helpful to hear. This pattern, where sleep improves and then becomes more disrupted again, is not new. It's actually been observed for decades. One of the most well-known sleep studies by Moore and Ocko in 1957 looked at sleep patterns in the first 6 months of life. And it's often quoted as evidence that babies can sleep through the night from around 3 months. But that's not the full story. In that study, sleeping through the night was defined as just 5 hours. And more importantly, many of the babies who began sleeping longer stretches around 3 months went back to more frequent night waking by 6 months. So this idea that sleep improves in a straight line and should stay that way has never really been accurate. Sleep goes up and down. It always has. So when night waking increases, the more useful question is, what has changed? Because it almost always follows a period where something is evolving. That might be development, sleep needs, awareness, stimulation, or general unsettledness. And sometimes that change is obvious, but often it builds gradually until sleep starts to reflect it more clearly. One of the biggest drivers of increased night waking is development. When the brain is learning, growing and wiring new skills, sleep can become lighter and more interrupted. But not all babies experience this in the same way. A lot of that comes down to temperament and sensitivity. Some babies are naturally more alert, more reactive, more affected by change, and those babies are more likely to show that sensitivity through sleep. So night waking can feel more intense, but there's also a second layer here. The adult response matters. A parent who understands what's happening and can adapt flexibly is often able to adjust rhythms, modify expectations, respond to increased needs, whereas when there's anxiety, uncertainty, or a strong focus on getting back to how things were, that's where things can feel stuck. Because the reality is sleep doesn't go backwards. The child who slept one way a few weeks ago is now different. Trying to recreate an old pattern often creates more friction. Another very common reason for increased night waking is that sleep needs have changed, and this is where things often get missed. There's a strong cultural assumption that babies should go to bed at a certain time, often around 7 p.m. But if that timing doesn't match actual sleep need, it can backfire. For example, around 4 months, total sleep often reduces compared to earlier months. So if daytime sleep hasn't adjusted and bedtime is moved earlier on top of that, there can be more time in bed than the body needs. And that often leads to resistance at bedtime, false starts, more night waking, not because something is wrong, but because the timing no longer fits. Feeding is another area that often gets misunderstood. There's this common assumption that as babies get older, they should need fewer night feeds. But when you look at biology, that doesn't always make sense, because brain development and growth are happening rapidly, and a lot of that happens at night. The brain uses a vast amount of energy. Its preferred fuel is sugar, and milk is rich in lactose, milk sugar. So during periods of growth, learning and development, it makes sense that some babies may need to feed more at night, not less. And feeding isn't just about calories anyway. It's also about connection, reassurance, regulation. So increased feeding at night is often part of the same picture, not a separate problem. When children are going through change, their need for support increases. That's true during the day. It's also true at night. Not because night is different, but because those needs exist 24/7. It's just that at night, the impact on us feels bigger because everyone is more tired. It's less convenient. So increased night waking is often an expression of, I need more support right now, not I've learnt something wrong. Instead of trying to stop the waking, it's more useful to step back and look at the bigger picture. A few things can really help here. Look at the overall sleep across 24 hours. Does the amount of sleep being offered still match current needs? Remember, sleep needs vary. Some babies need more, some need less than averages. Consider daytime experience. Is there enough movement, play, stimulation, and time outside? Make space for connection, one-to-one time, responsiveness, and interaction. Don't focus so much on keeping everything calm and controlled. Fun, silliness, and engagement matter too. Then bring in a calmer, predictable wind down towards bedtime, because often it's not about doing more at night, it's about what's happening across the whole day. So does it settle? In most cases, yes. Night waking reduces when development becomes less intense, needs are better matched, and things feel easier to manage again. Not because it's been fixed, but because the reason behind it has eased. So if night waking has suddenly increased, it's not random, it's not a step backwards, it's a response to change. And the goal isn't to force sleep back to where it was, it's to recognise that things have moved on and to respond to what's needed now. If this series has helped make sense of what's happening with sleep for you, you can go back and watch the earlier videos where we break down why sleep suddenly gets worse, what's really behind sleep regressions, and how long these phases tend to last. Because when you understand the pattern, sleep stops feeling unpredictable, even when it's disrupted.